Dan, welcome to the Phase 3 Biotech Leadership Podcast. It's great to have you here, and really just have to say very excited about what we're going to talk today, and would be very grateful if before we get going, you can just give a little bit of an intro as to who you are, where you've come from. You don't have to say how we met. I'm not sure if you remember, it was many years ago, but I won't put you on the spot. But we'd love for you just to introduce yourself to the audience.
Great. First, I want to thank you, Alex. It is always great to talk to you. We have a good rapport and we have a good back and forth. So it's always a great conversation. So I'm Dan Couto for the audience. I am the Chief Operating Officer of Vedanta Biosciences, which is a small microbiome company in Cambridge, Massachusetts, clinical phase microbiome company. My background is probably unique to most. I've worked at a huge breadth of different kinds of companies, different size companies, small biotech startups, all the way through to large pharma companies. I've worked in locations that span San Francisco, Boston, Idaho, Wisconsin, New York, and then the Northeast of England, which I would talk about. And I've learned quite a bit about people and how different locations and companies and cultures operate and the types of ways that they tackle challenges that come up in drug development. Another aspect that if you look in my background, I tend to gravitate towards new technologies. I enjoy the cutting edge of new technologies. And I've played with brand new technologies all throughout, whether it's transgenics back in the late 90s for trans animals, all the way through to new ways to purify proteins through crystallization in bulk, not for analysis. And now I'm dabbling and playing heavily into the microbiome space, which has been fairly hot for the last 10 years. So, yeah. That's what gets me going.
That's me in a nutshell. Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, Dan, thank you for that. And yeah, I mean, anyone who looks through your career, I think, can see that you are not afraid of taking on a new challenge. And in fact, I think when I think of you, the subject that you've chosen to talk about today, which is the importance of mastering change as a biotech leader, I really can't think of anyone better to discuss it, to be honest with you. So I guess the first place to start is just to ask, why is this important to you? And also, why do you think it's something that's so important to a generation of leaders which are coming through?
I think you got to recognize, especially for small biotechs, that it's important because it's a necessity in order to survive in a lot of cases. Change happens, and to be able to build the right skill sets, the right talents, the right team, you name it. We'll go into a lot of it, but in order to build all that out, you're doing it because you have to, in order to have a company that's developing drugs thrive and move forward in timelines, in technical challenges, all of these aspects. When people think about change, a lot of times they're thinking about challenges that happen or things that are not predicted from a technical point of view, right? You're thinking about, scientifically you do an experiment or you run a trial and you had an outcome that wasn't expected. And then you got to figure out what to do, but it's a technical challenge, right? In actuality, that is true. Those happen, but the challenges that are also there that you have to figure out have to do with when people leave the company unexpectedly or turnover or things that are outside your control, like the financial landscape and your ability to raise money in that landscape. How are you going to do it? It gets to a whole series of skills that you need to try and hone and master, like problem solving or being creative or being, collaborate or communicating, or any of those fundamental things. The one that I think people take for granted, we talk about teams and teamwork, but to truly understand the role of a team and how it functions and the way to get the most out of a team, that's always a challenge because your team is always shifting and changing So you have to, again, pivot or adjust to that.
Yeah. And I think it's fascinating, Dan, because there's a lot there that we can jump into. I think some of the pain that people are feeling in the industry right now is certainly related to the financial realm, the lack of free flowing cash, I think, in the sector. And really, it's been 18 months to 2 years where we've seen a lot of companies run out of money and disappear. I think one of those things that is maybe a challenge for younger leaders coming through as well is, do they understand how they fit into that big picture? And ultimately, how do they start to build that understanding? And I guess that's one of the questions that I would ask for you, is that obviously you are now a COO, having come from the realm of CTO and up the technical track, but very much everything from the process side, the manufacturing side, the engineering side. And I can say very comfortably and with a lot of confidence that there are lots of people that never really make that final leap into becoming a really well-rounded, what I would call business leader that looks through the lens of tech ops, opposed to a tech ops leader which does a little bit of business. So for you, when did that start as well in terms of kind of building those skills? And were there maybe career moves or companies that you went to and it may have been a shock at the time, but you were like, you didn't know how useful that move was going to be?
Yeah, I think early on, you never really realize the impact of the things, the decisions that you make early. And I think people have to realize also that they change over time.
Sure.
Time is the element, right? You have to be effective as a leader. I think you really need to take your time and learn what you're trying to lead. And in today's world, I'm seeing a lot of very ambitious, very eager A players, like really good people that want to be the CEO right away or want to be one of the major leaders within an organization right away. And in order to do that, you have to really experience and understand the people that you mean to lead and what they're going through. And that just takes time. So when I was doing this early on in my career, my first jobs were very technical because I thought technology was king. I thought if you could master that type of a thing, that you would be able to rule. And then what I realized was technology is not king, money is king. And so therefore, if you could get the money, you could buy the technology or something like that. And therefore, I started to try and learn more business aspects in the middle of my career. But when I matured further and had more mentors and watched more people and more leaders, because that's really how I, as an individual, learns the best. I surround myself with good people. I try to work under good bosses. I've been lucky to be able to choose my career that way with good people. As I matured, what I realized was communication is king. Because if you could really be a great communicator, if you can paint a picture with your story, if you can be very clear and concise, if you can do those things and be dynamic in doing that, you can convince people to be able to give you money or convince people around why technology is good or needed. Without that, you're really only a portion of what you need to be as a good leader. So I landed on communication as the thing king. There are a lot of aspects to the leader. There's many books to read about that too. But that's really the evolutionary journey I think that people have to go through and for themselves is to gather enough experience in different aspects of a business to know what true drug development is about. And we talked about locations a second ago. When I was living down in New York in my last company, and it was a startup company and we raised money, we took the company public, we did a lot of things in this small company in New York. And that gave me just another facet of understanding for the business around finance. And it wasn't just because we took those company through these steps. Being in New York, you have access to financial institutes and institutions more readily. And so when you have now Zooms or you have interactions that aren't in person, When you're in New York, you can actually have face-to-face interactions with financial investors. When you're in Boston, there's a lot of venture capital. You can have face-to-face kind of interaction. This is all pre-pandemic when everybody, actually talked to one another in person and stuff. But now that aspect is melted away where Zooms are how you do it, or some type of video conferencing is how you do it. And we're losing this kind of building relationship thing, doing it that way. But my point was, in my journey in being in New York, I learned just yet another aspect later in my career that helped me understand the full aspect of how to build and run a company.
Yeah. And if I hear you rightly, Dan, it's recognizing that you've got to master the ecosystem.
Oh, yeah.
And the whole thing, and that there are different aspects to that. So it's making me smile because obviously communication king, and we'll probably be on a poster somewhere, but, also to think about relationships and the fact that we have to foster relationships actively. They don't turn up, they don't land on your doorstep. I mean, I'm a headhunter, for goodness sake. My entire business is reliant on relationships. And I think there are lots of people out there who don't understand that relationships are not about what can you give me? So, hi, Dan, what can you give me? That's not a relationship. That's a transaction.
That's right.
And a relationship, I think, is more detailed. And it's where you take your time. And over time, people see the consistency of behavior, and that's what generates trust. And then I think you go through that. But to your point, the leadership challenge that I think lots of people are facing now is, have you done your time?
That's right. And so the relationship piece of it, you're absolutely, the key word I heard from you is trust, right? You have to build trust. Trust doesn't happen overnight. It's something that comes with time, whether the relationship is like an emotional one or a business one or any type of relationship. And the reason you need to build relationships is because the job that you're trying to do is, and you have to realize this, it's much, much bigger than what you can handle. All cases, drug development there's too many facets to it. There's too many moving parts, and there's too many nuances to a technology for you to know everything about it, or even just tactically be able to handle all of it. So you have to rely on people. And sometimes those people are ones that you can gather in your team or in your company. But a lot of times those people are ones that you invoke from your past, right? One that you are calling upon in your network. And if you handle yourself with respect and you are a good person and you are a giving and receiving back and forth, people will want to be loyal to you over time. I have contacts that I've had for 25 years that if I pick up the phone, they'll say, "Hey, Dan, how's it going?" Blah, blah. And then we'll chat. And if I need a favor, they will do it. If I get a phone call from a boss of mine of 20 years ago, his name is Greg Leposki. People who know him will know. If Greg Leposki called me up and said, "Hey, Dan, I need a favor," I would literally drop what I was doing for my current company. And because there's this loyalty that's just been there for such a long time to help Greg out to do what he needs to do.
Yeah. And do you know what? I think it's a very good point, Dan. I think the other thing as well is trust can also be broken. So in every relationship, whether it's romantic, whether it's a business one, there's going to be something that happens and just frankly, you piss someone off. Like, it's going to happen, right? In fact, you could even argue that the best C-suite teams are not the ones that agree all the time.
Oh, no.
Right? There's someone who once said to me that being in the C-suite is basically like one continuous argument inside the boardroom. And by the time we leave, we all say, we're on the bus. And we may not all agree with those decisions, but we all have to be on that bus and point in the right direction. But I think there's a danger sometimes, especially when people are pulling together teams, whether you're a first-time CEO or something like that, which is not just hiring people from your past, but hiring the people who will challenge you and valuing the challenge and not making it where everything is so buddy that someone's afraid to challenge you because they don't want to hurt your feelings.
Yeah,
Right?
a lot of it boils down to, I mean, when you're looking at yourself, it boils down to truly being honest with yourself about things and your self-esteem. So when you start on this journey, you need to get your ego out of the way. You got to get politics out of the way. You got to get a lot of things out of the way and truly determine what you're good at and what you're not good at so that you can supplement what you're not good at properly and have a team that has synergy, right? That is not all the same yes people that agree with you because they all think the same. You need a cross-functional or cross-section of personalities that are looking at it from different angles. It's funny, in my career, I've probably taken at least a half a dozen Myers-Briggs studies, right? With the circle and the what your preferences are. And we all laugh about it because we have to go through it and we answer a bunch of questions and then we get a chart, and then some guy that we pay a lot of money comes and has a seminar and tells us what it means and then says, hey, see, these people get along and these don't because of this. And if you really try and understand what you gravitate towards, what your preferences are, you can start to build the more effective team with that and with the pieces that assemble, because it's like a puzzle. When you start, you have one piece and then you add on, but once you start building this puzzle, it less and less shapes fit properly. So you have to really select the right individual that supplements what's needed, what's left to be needed. Just going back a second though, I would classify like in my company currently, our senior team, our C-suite, we act more like brothers and sisters, like a family. When you fight, we don't agree all the time, but we're respectful. Right. And we poke fun at one another and we laugh together and we have fun. That's the whole point. And if you can't get along in not just good times, but also in hard times, then it doesn't really work. And so to be able to foster this open communication, you have to be able to make sure the environment is one that people don't get smacked when they speak up.
There you go.
Thwarted when they speak up. Even if the idea is crazy, you don't make them feel like an idiot. You make them feel like they're contributing, because there's so many times, Alex, that I've seen a idea that was a little bit left field come in, but it sparked another idea or innovation, some hybrid to it that then brought it to a new level. And that's the type of thing you need when you're solving these problems. You need people that can think outside the box. And it's why you have brainstorm sessions are free form. They're not like they have rules. You need everything on the table and then you start cutting, right?
Yeah. It's funny because it reminds me of a couple of stories, right? I remember somebody piling their entire team into a room, and on the board, the first thing they wrote was, "There's no such thing as a stupid idea." And I was just like, I like it. Like, very good. Like, set the stage, right? And, also at Celgene, what they had like literally written on the walls was assume positive intent.
Right.
So, and with those two things, I mean, what amazing freedom to operate, right? And just encouraging people to solve for themselves, not just become reliant maybe on the hierarchy to solve. So I want to go back a little bit, Dan, because you spoke about being aware. And I think, it's easy to say, it's hard to do. So what are the best methods, I guess, you found for becoming maybe more self-aware? I think if we talk about Myers-Briggs or Discovery Insights or Culture Index or any of these things, I think they're useful tools, right? And I really do. I've very much come down on the side of they're great for relative comparison. So if 200 people all in the same company all use the same tool, you now have a relative comparison for those people in that company, which gives you a framework to be able to operate from or with or something like that. They're not perfect, but then if you take that tool and you compare it to Enneagram or Culture Index or something else, you'll get wildly different results. So the tools don't compare between each other. but I think they can be useful as a starting point. But other than things like that, are there any other things that you've become a big fan of?
Yeah. Well, talking about different tools, I think the goal of all of that is to really help with your thought process or focusing you on your awareness. Not that it's going to give you an answer,
Sure.
that it's going to get you thinking about this, right? And so a lot of times I talk about the difference between what people focus on for IQ and what leaders need to really focus on around EQ, right? And as far as EQ goes, having different tools in your toolbox to be able to talk to people is the key, right? Or to be aware that different people are different and they need different things.
Sure.
And someone is not really hearing you, or they're having trouble with something, you have to change up your game to say it in a different way or show it a different way so they can get it. Because that's what communication is about. If you're talking and no one understands you, that's not communication. This is the biggest thing for communication, and taking in so you can adjust again and then come back with a way that your idea or what you're trying to get across is clear, right? You mentioned earlier about how do you break down this self-awareness part of it, and to touch on that. So it's never, ever a good place when you're lying to yourself. If nowhere else, you should be able to be honest with yourself. It's hard sometimes, but there's no one else around and you're sitting there and you're like, okay, well, you don't have to really lie to yourself, pump your ego up to yourself. You got to really try and strip that away. And it's easier said than done, because I think a lot of people don't have this self-confidence. And when they don't have self-confidence, they start to try and supplement with things like having a bigger bank account or material things or a list of accomplishments on a resume that are easy, or all kinds of accolades on their walls, or things that make them feel like they're worth something. And so to be able to strip down and understand what you're good at and what you're not good at is the starting point. And being okay with what you're good at and that you're not good at things is totally fine. I read one of the management books and leadership books a while ago, and I remember this one chapter that talks about focus. And the example that they gave had to do with a professional baseball player that was a world champion in batting. His batting was the best, or one of the best. And they talked about the fact that his fielding wasn't that great, and that he could spend more time on fielding to be a better all-around player, or he could be the best at batting and just focus all his energy on batting. And I'm in the camp of focus, because if you at least recognize that you're not good at certain things, you can always add people in that can supplement you. I'm not a very good completer finisher, right? I get bored. I don't know if it's because I'm the youngest of 6 and attention, whatever it is, but I get bored after a while and I tend not to complete. But I know that about myself. And therefore, a lot of the people that I have very close to me in work are the opposite. They are completer finishers, but they have trouble with the concept in the beginning and trying to get the idea going. So together we're formidable, and they appreciate what I can give to them. And I totally appreciate what they can give to me to try to get the job done. So to at least, I guess, to circle back around, to be aware of what you're good and what you're not good at as a leader is the beginning of trying to make the team the best team you can be.
Yeah. I think it's a really good point, Dan. And I was thinking of models as you were talking about it. I mean, I think most people are aware of Gallup Strengths Finder. There was another one recently that came up by Patrick Lencioni called 6 Types of Working Genius, which you haven't read it, great book. And essentially we all have 2 areas where we're pretty naturally gifted, right? That's our thing. We get a lot of energy from it. There's 2 that you learn, and there's 2 that takes a lot of energy, right? So you could do them. You might not do them as well as someone who's naturally gifted, and it will exhaust you doing them. And it really challenges you to think about the blend of the team. And like making a fantastic dish, a beautiful meal, or a great cocktail, right? It's not just about one. It's about everything coming together and being harmonious. There was also something which made me smile because I never thought about this, but you were talking about adaptive listening and active listening. I wrote adaptive because I actually preferred it, to be honest. And this idea of communication and adjusting for your audience, and it made me start to think about sales because I was like, in a sales role, I feel like those who are the most successful do have that ability to weave the narrative to the person, right? And help the audience reach that conclusion. And then my brain went, that's interesting. There are a lot of CEOs that are salespeople. And there's a thread here that we can pull through, I think, because the communication is what it started. And obviously, they're also the money getters. They're also commercially connected to it. And so it all starts to make a little sense. I do actually think that we are getting to an era where having a really strong understanding of operations, of CMC, of the technical, and combining that with communication and ideally some adaptive listening and everything else that goes with that could actually make for a fantastic CEO for different companies. But I think we also have to appreciate that we need to have that financial and commercial acumen to go with it, which is a little bit outside maybe of the zone that a lot of technical folks play on that side of things. So the other thing which I wanted to also just think about is this idea of change, mastering change. I feel like change is almost a bad word, right, for a lot of people. I don't like change. Like a lot of people say things like that. But I think where there's change, there's opportunity. So how have you got more comfortable with ambiguity? And to your point, what is it that's created this confidence in being able to maybe cope in these situations? Because I think that sense of overwhelm is what people fear.
No, and so I've experienced the overwhelm mostly, well, early in my career because I didn't really look at things the same way I do now, right? And so the first thing, just to touch upon change is, it may be good or bad. It doesn't really matter. It's really more your perspective of it. But the one thing about change is it's inevitable.
It's happening.
It happens all the time. So you have to just accept the fact that it's going to happen or it could happen, right? Once you get there, then you can start preparing. And when we talk about preparing, you talk about scenario planning. At work for us, we do a lot of scenario planning for the what ifs, right? And not the really out there what ifs, the what ifs that are probable, right? And we spend our time with backup strategies. We spend our time with two plan Bs and plan Cs because very quickly a plan B becomes the plan A because what you were expecting didn't happen. And then you move forward, but at least it gives you a comfort that you have a plan. So that's one thing I think people, when are working within the change zone, have to be able to have a comfort that, okay, and communicate those plans to people around you so they feel comfortable and they can do their jobs about plan A. Say, look, you're all rowing in this direction. This is plan A. And if this doesn't happen, we got plan B and we're going to do this. And we got plan B and C and we're going to do this. And that gives people comfort so that they can do their jobs and not worry about whether they're going to have a job. The other aspect that you touch upon with change in a small biotech, change is something that then gives you that nexus of events that spark innovation, right? And there's so many times where in my career, something that was unexpected gave us an aha moment that gave us invention, right?
Yeah. Do you have an example, Dan?
Oh, Jesus. I mean, even right now, like we're dealing with some things that no one's ever done before with microbiome, right?
Sure.
We're dealing with bacteria that are the active ingredient in the therapeutic. And the bacteria is an organism that's very complex compared to a protein that's very complex as well, compared to a small molecule. So this evolution of complexity is there. So understanding the full breadth of that bacteria and how it grows and what it does and all these other things has been a fascinating aha moment where we've had a failure in manufacturing, or we had a failure in what we expected to happen with a bacteria or with a few bacteria. And then we do an investigation for almost 3, 4, 5 months at a time.
Yeah.
And we learn so much more about it because we're looking to find out that answer to this thing. But what we learn is all these other things about it that we didn't consider.
Sure.
Then what that does is it's no different than like GMP operational concepts of continual improvement. So all of those findings or all those learnings, and you apply it to the things that haven't broken yet, and she worked with them too. And that elevates your whole entire platform up a notch, right? Every time that happens. So for us, we've had a couple of those moments within Vedanta that have really propelled us up a curve of understanding about our platform that then makes our yield so much bigger, or allows our bacteria to have better stability, or any other aspect that you're looking for in our product. But that innovation is something that people think happen purposely, and it does sometimes, but a lot of times it just happens because of this back and forth iteration on an idea that then develops into aha moments.
Yeah. Well, I think it's funny, isn't it? If you think through history, there are so many of these moments in our industry. I mean, everyone knows the Alexander Fleming list, obviously commercialized by Chain and Flory, but, a failed project sat on the side, followed by a curious, what's going on here? I think the same with Viagra, obviously, and to a certain extent, GLP-1s. I mean, all of these were developed for different reasons, and a side effect suddenly became the more commercializable piece of it, right? And pulled it into a new world. So keeping your eyes open, and maybe even it goes back to what we said before, which is there is no such thing as a stupid idea.
Well, a lot of times people get blocked because, and it's not their fault. They're so close to something. They're trying to execute on this. They aren't able to actually keep this open view about things in general. And that's why, again, elements of a team that are effective is you have people that need to do this, but then you have to have people, and I'm one of the other people that have to keep an eye out on the bigger picture or the broader, or step back from what the detail is and look at what's going on. Because there are too many times that a player team that is supposed to be fantastic is missing something. And then when I come in, I zoom in, I get into the team, I talk to them and stuff, and then I zoom out. I pull a grenade, I throw in, and I leave, right? And there's so many times where I zoom in and I say something, and then I leave, and they're like, where did that come from? Why didn't we see that? And it's because my part of the team, my role on the team is different than theirs. They're not expected to have all the answers, and I'm not expected to be able to have all the answers or execute. But together, that's where it happens.
Yeah, I always like this idea of creativity being particles flowing through space, and they get real close to you. And if you don't reach out and grab it, it disappears, right? It goes somewhere else. I think, I have to ask you, do you have a creative background? So music, art, painting? You're like, this is one of mine. So we'll put it in the show notes. All those who wish to buy.
DanielCoutoPaintings.com. So the answer is yes. So in our household, I'm the one that cooks. And part of that is my background. My mom, I used to cook when I was little with my mom.
Sure.
And I learned a lot of stuff, just like a number of people have, but I enjoy it. So the reason in our house, I usually do the cooking. In addition to that, I've always drawn when I was little. I've always drawn, been artistic, but I never really took it as a formal thing up until the point where when my wife and I were newlyweds, my wife decided to go back and get her master's degree, and that was very intensive. And I needed to find something to occupy my time so I didn't bother her. So I decided I was going to try my hand. This was back in the early 2000s at painting.
Okay.
And so I started out with a lot of people do, trying to copy masters, Monet, Van Gogh, whatever.
Oh, just the easy ones, right? Just
Well,
from the beginning.
see how good you were, right? To say, can I do that shit?
Dad, if you were Monet, it's ambitious, but fair enough.
So I have this short attention span with it. So after I did that, I'm like, okay, I can do that. Then I moved on to, okay, maybe I can do originals in the style of, right? And then after that got boring, then I was like, okay, well, what's the next? And then what's come of it, what I figured out about myself is my originals now are not realistic or impressionistic. They're abstracts, like what you're seeing here as an example.
Sure.
And then what I have gone to also is from a color scheme, I've gone to primary colors because I like the idea of, in an abstract, a person looking at something, and through these primary colors, you can start almost mixing them yourself. And through an abstract, you can determine what it is you're looking at, as opposed to an artist saying, this is what you should be looking at. And so that's why, for me, a lot of my stuff that I do personally, because I do commissionings and stuff on the side for people that want things. But for my personal stuff that I like to do, I've landed on very abstract based things.
Absolutely.
I paint.
And I think there's an interesting thing here because I'm a musician. I did not draw this, but I was a drummer for many years, 14, traveled all over the world. And jazz drummer. So I feel like that secret's now out in the world. And the thing that I always found very interesting is the process of learning. And I think this kind of applies to what we're talking about here as well, which is, to your point, when you learn something, you learn everybody else's stuff first, right? So in the world of music, they teach you to play other people's songs, right? And it's a bit like learning words or phrases or things like that. And they always used to say it takes about 10 years until you find a voice, because you're just building this vocabulary and this kind of lexicon. And then one day somebody says, so Dan, what do you think? And what happens is you express something, but you're stealing little pieces from everybody else.
That's right.
And it becomes this creative engine. Now, obviously, in the last 2 years, ChatGPT, all of the generative AI and stuff like that's exactly, well, maybe not exactly, but pretty close to the system that they are using, and it needs to be trained. And then it's interpreting and creating a pastiche, which is then applicable. But I think what's also funny is we don't think about this from a leadership perspective, but a leader that is tenured is made up of all of the experiences they've had in companies, all of the experiences they've had under other leaders, good and bad. Because I'm sure, everyone's got a story about a bad leader that they worked, and they may have just gone, I'm never going to do that. Right. But now if that was a 1, you're now a 0. And that has shaped you. And then there's obviously been the people that have modeled behaviors, which you've also thought, yeah, you know what, that was great. Like that's definitely getting written down in the notebook somewhere. And it starts to evolve and come true. I think this goes back also to this idea of time. And a half-baked cake isn't much fun to eat.
No.
And so you've got to give yourself time and put yourself in the environments where you become the best that you can be. I mean, I think something that you have, Dan, which a lot of other people don't, is certainly tenure, but also really different environments, right? And when I look through your background and things like that, and obviously there was the early Genzyme days and things like that. But the one which always made me laugh was, and I mean this in a respectful and nice way, is you going from San Francisco Bay in 2005 to 2007 to the northeast of England. And we were chuckling because I literally said to you, I am English from the south, and it might as well be a different country, right? They sound funny, they drink strange stuff, keep brown, and it's just a very different culture. So how was adapting to that change, especially being from the US straight in to, I would say it would be a hostile environment, but certainly, I mean, maybe it was, but certainly into just such a different culture. And
so that was, so just as the starting point, being in San Francisco as an environment, which again, to your point, is much different than even the East Coast. They're just different cultures, and people will understand that the same about other places like the South, the Midwest, or whatever, right? So San Francisco culture, more laid back, more of a kind of a committee type of a inclusion type of a thing, not just because now it's what everybody is doing, but even like 15, 20 years ago, it was this way as well. So if you go from there and you go to England, let alone the Northeast, what I found was I went from wearing very corporate casual, even like Patagonia, whatever, to work, to a whole new wardrobe that I built to go there in a more formal thing. Everybody, or a lot of people, it doesn't matter what level, tie,
suits and ties. Yeah. And we should say this was the late 2000s, so it may be different now and pre-pandemic and everything else.
That's right. But still, it was more formal, more structured as far as like organizational structure. I found also, because where we were, it was a legacy ICI complex, right? ICI is Imperial Chemical Industries. It was a massive chemical company in the Northeast of England or worldwide. And that had a huge complex that broke into smaller companies in the late 70s. And one of those companies became a biotech that became what I was at the time, was a VC of biologics. But the point was, it was a union shop. And so you had legacy ICI union still as the union shop there, which was another dimension of different tiers within the company, because you had union, non-union, then you had management and workforce, all of these social kind of groupings. So here I come, American, and I was one of only 2 Americans on the whole entire site of over 550 people. And I come in at a fairly high level, because I wanted to at least I didn't want to try and be what I wasn't. And I wanted to try and exploit the advantages of being what I was. And so I was totally owning the fact that I was an American. And that gave me a little bit of grace in some areas, because I was a little more forward and bold and a little bit more like out of the box, creative, whatever. And they just accepted, oh, that's Dan, whatever. And so that was there. But over time, that was embraced. And then that was what I was expecting to happen. Another aspect, but then it didn't happen overnight. Back to our trust idea, the idea around being able to trust me, and the idea of being able to trust me, especially from the side of the union, because I had to negotiate time deals with the union and be able to negotiate contracts with the union. And so to be able to trust me was a big deal. And what I tried to do tactic wise was just to be honest and understand that the best deal you can have is one where both sides benefit from it. And there's some give from both sides too. And whether you agree with that or not, it's at least what the word is fair. What we're looking for is a fair deal, right? They want something that's fair. They want something that's able to satisfy their main concerns and so forth. So listening and communicating properly and being transparent and simple about what you're saying goes a long way. And then over time, trust builds from that. And then walls start to break down that were there before between management and working, or between union and non-union. Those things start to melt away. Give opportunities to people that are in union that they never had before, in non-union places and stuff. So when I also got there, there was a huge language barrier, even though we all spoke English. But what it forced me to do was really to listen, because it took me 2 or 3 passes at understanding what they were trying to say.
Yeah.
For those that aren't from England, the Northeast, there's a Geordie accent, and that's Newcastle up in the north, in Northumberland. And so we had a number of people from that area where the speech was just fast and jumbled and slurred in slang. And then we had people from the west side of the north, near Liverpool, which had a different accent, even though I was like, okay, well, that sounds the same to me. It's all like totally, after a while, I could tell the difference between the two. And then we had a lot of people from Scotland, which was third and to it. That was also a bit, you could tell people that were Scottish if you watch enough movies or whatever. But this was all a melting pot of language that caused me to really need to listen. One other thing I wanted to share before you were mentioning about how people learn, just to open up about myself. I have dyslexia, and I'm very, very dyslexic from the get-go. And so the way I learn isn't the way that most people learn. But where it comes to my vocabulary, I've been able to accumulate a good vocabulary. I use words. I don't think people can tell that unless they correct my spelling or make me read a passage right in live. I get very nervous, and it's horrible. I've accumulated my vocabulary by listening to other people talk, and also by watching movies and listening to how they phrase things and watching. So I've gathered over time all these things, the way that you were talking about exactly, to build this vocabulary, to give me the arsenal of things to be able to use in communication. It's an assembly of knowledge, right? Whether it's techniques of management or what to do in a situation when things are changing. It's an assembly of knowledge from a bunch of different companies I've worked with that have different approaches to solving problems, because you had different systems in place at Merck to be able to handle things a certain way, versus at a small biotech where they get everybody in a room and they try to throw things at the wall and see what sticks. And so it's an assembly of knowledge that transcends work, because I use these skills with my kids. I use these in talking to other people at the lacrosse game, right? Or whatever. It's not like it goes away. It becomes part of what you are.
And
Yeah.
And if I may, I insert in there, Dan, I mean, it's not just part of who you are, it's also part of the toolkit.
That's right.
And we briefly mentioned this earlier, which was something that I think grows over time when it comes to solving a new challenge or in a new environment, is not the confidence in your ability to solve the problem or have the answer to the problem. It's actually your ability to use the right tools to solve the problem.
That's right. That's exactly right. And so I'm a chemical engineer by training, right? And so from an engineering perspective, what they teach you in university is not the answer. They teach you how to solve problems if you're really paying attention to what you're trying to learn, right? You have techniques and tools and stuff that you learn, your principles and theory and stuff. But what you're doing, by the time you go through your 4th year, you're getting to a point where you can look at something new and figure out a systematic approach to trying to solve that problem. And that applies across the board, whether it's something that's at work or something that's domestic or whatever. And people make fun of engineers because they think in certain ways. But we're trained to do this, but it's about being able to solve problems.
Yeah. And you know what? I think maybe another thing to that when it comes to the leadership piece is you can't teach someone to be talented.
Right.
Right. So, and you see this all the time where, especially in the world of sales, right?
Yeah.
The most maligned position, I think, of any salesperson is the sales manager role, because they go from being an amazing single contributor. You're so good, we're going to make you a manager. So now the idea is that in theory that you teach all these other people. But if that person is only doing it through natural talent and by the seat of their pants, versus having a system, they will not succeed in that sales manager role because they can't teach someone to have talent, right? So I think that's also a really kind of crucial point here, Dan, which is if we think about this chemical engineering mindset, or maybe some of the sciences, what they're giving us is a system, a framework to break something down and then reassemble. And then to your point, blend it with communication, right? And focus on the communication to be able to truly communicate that across an organization. One question which I have to ask before we leave, and I don't mean this in a pejorative way, I'm not trying to be mean, is just that when you're working cross-culturally, did you also find that your communication maybe style changed to the point where you simplify so that you can reach people in an easier way if you're talking to a broad group? Or was it more you would say the same thing 3 different ways to to each section of the group? You know what I mean? Like,
no, it's no different than like preparing your presentation or whatever. You have to understand who your audience is. And so if you have a strong EQ and you can really use your skills of taking in information, listening or observing, and not being the one that needs to talk first, to be able to get that so that you can then adjust your approach to people, I think that's what makes it more successful. But the thing that I have also found is I believe there are some universal things about communicating, and it doesn't really matter what culture you're in. Universally, a good communicator in my mind is very clear and simple and concise. And that's helpful whether you're in one culture or another culture, to be able to be that way universally. You may adjust things that are particular to what they care about in your message or in your vision or in the whatever, but how you deliver it should still be very clear and upfront and concise so they can get it the simplest way, right? Attention spans for people are short for anything, or whether you're talking about a board of directors and what we're about to read, they need to get the message right up front in the title, right? Or whether you're talking to an individual and they glaze over after like 2 or 3 sentences, right? You want to make sure, or an email, right? You want to make sure in the first couple of things that you're trying to communicate that you're getting across what you're trying to get to. Like, tell them exactly right in the first line what the problem is. Tell me don't make me wait to the bottom of this.
Don't build it up.
Don't build. But that goes to the way that people think, right?
Yeah.
I've also thought that there's bottom-up thinkers and top-down thinkers, right? And so when you're a bottom-up thinker, you feel that you need to build your case in a crescendo to get to your point. A top-down thinker is more like, why am I listening to you?
Right.
What is the point of my time here? What are you getting at the whole time that they're talking? And so if you understand what kind of thinker you're speaking to one-on-one, you can tailor what you're doing and say, look, this is why I'm telling you what I'm telling you right up front. And then they're like, oh, okay, I get it. Whether you're top or bottom down, it's right out there.
It's a beautiful point, Dan. It's a beautiful point. Well, look, sadly, we're a little bit out of time, but I got to say thank you so much for being here. As suspected, a wonderful conversation.
It's always fun talking to you, Alex. We could go on and on. But the things we talk about, I think it's because we're passionate about it. We really care about doing a good job and the people that we're working with and getting the most out of people and having them benefit from these types of learning. So thanks for inviting me. This is great.
You're very welcome. And of course, if anyone wants to find Dan, I think they can find you on LinkedIn. And I'm sure they'll see you at a conference or two on the circuit, if they let you out these days. Very good. Well, look, Dan, thank you for everybody else. If you've liked it, please give us a thumbs up, follow us, share it with your friends, send it to your mum. Anything that you can do to help get the message out, we'd love that. And please tune in next time.
Great. Thanks, Alex.